There's a sacred silence that follows every ending. It's that strange stillness after the storm, when everything is quieter, but your heart still echoes what was lost. You ask, why did God take that person away? Why did he close that door when I gave everything? But what if the removal wasn't rejection? It was redirection. What if the loss was not subtraction, but preparation? Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs." That's not fatalism. That's clarity. It's understanding that when something leaves, it's because its purpose in your story has ended. The Stoics taught that peace begins where resistance ends, and faith whispers the same truth, not as doctrine, but as direction. When God removes, it's never to leave you empty. It's to make room for what aligns. You see, there's a pattern in divine timing. First the removal, then the silence, and only after the revelation. But we get stuck in the silence. We mourn what left so deeply that we miss what's arriving. Maybe God already sent something new, but you're still standing at the grave of what he buried. When you hold on to what's gone, you block what's meant to come. That's not punishment, that's delay. Seneca said, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." The faith within that line is powerful. Endings are not conclusions, they're transitions. So maybe this is where your healing begins, not in asking, why did it end, but in asking, what is God making space for? Because purpose always follows pruning. What you call loss, heaven calls alignment. What you call empty, God calls ready. There's a quiet kind of power that grows when you stop chasing explanations and start embracing evolution. You stop begging for old things to return, and you start preparing for new things to arrive. That's when peace returns, not because everything is fixed, but because you finally stopped fighting what was meant to fade. If this resonates, remember, thousands of souls are walking through the same silence, learning to trust what they can't yet see. They too are standing between what was removed and what's about to be revealed. You are not alone in this space between. It's the place where the old dies and purpose begins. It's strange. The hardest part is never the ending itself. It's the in-between, that stretch of days when nothing makes sense and everything feels unfinished. You wake up, but the world looks blurred. The silence after a goodbye has its own weight, and in that silence, the mind tries to rebuild the past, frame by frame, looking for reasons, for signs, for anything that makes the loss less painful. But reason rarely comforts the heart. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. Still, when change cuts deep, it doesn't feel like delight. It feels like death. The death of what we imagined life would be. And yet, every death hides a seed." That's where the Stoic and the soul finally meet. The Stoic says, "Accept." The soul whispers, "Trust." Both voices lead you toward the same peace. Because pain, when embraced instead of resisted, starts revealing meaning. You begin to notice how every closed door redirected your path. How every person who left freed a space for growth that wouldn't fit before. It doesn't happen fast. There's a phase where you'll want to go back. Not because you still belong there, but because the emptiness feels unbearable. That's when discipline becomes medicine. You wake up, make your bed, breathe deeply, walk in silence. You give the body rhythm so the soul can find balance. Seneca once wrote, "He who does not know what the world is, does not know where he is," meaning when you forget the bigger order, the loss feels random. But once you remember that life moves in cycles, not collapses, you start to see the removal was not random. It was realignment. Perhaps God removed what blocked your growth, not because you failed, but because you outgrew it. There's a kind of protection that looks like rejection until time explains it, and the time between is sacred. That's where purpose starts whispering. So if you're in that space between what left and what's next, don't rush to fill the silence. Sit with it. Let it teach you who you are without the attachments, without the noise, without the validation. That is where transformation begins, quietly, invisibly. The Stoics called it ataraxia, the calm born from self-control. Faith calls it grace, the calm born from surrender. Together, they build resilience, the kind that doesn't need everything to make sense in order to keep walking, because eventually you will look back and see that what left was never punishment. It was protection shaping direction. And what was withheld wasn't loss. It was space being made for the next chapter. Time passes, and little by little, the silence changes shape. It no longer feels like emptiness. It starts to feel like space. Space for breath. Space for something new to begin. At first, you resist. You think it's too quiet and too still, but soon that stillness begins to sound like peace, and peace is always the sign that healing has started. One morning you wake up and realize the pain is still there, but it no longer defines you. You stopped asking why God removed them and started whispering thank you for what you're about to send. That's the shift. That's the unseen moment when faith matures and the soul stops begging for what's gone. Because the truth is this: God never subtracts without preparing to multiply. He never removes without planning to restore. He never takes away without planting something deeper in its place. What he sends next is rarely what you expect, but it's always what your growth requires. Marcus Aurelius said, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make of it." Change is the language of heaven. And faith, real faith, is learning to translate it. So what does God send after removal? Not comfort first and clarity, not replacement, revelation. He sends understanding that reshapes the way you see everything that happened. You start to see purpose in what once felt pointless. You start to see protection in what once felt like punishment, and slowly you stop living with clenched fists. You open your hands and life flows again. The Stoic in you learns discipline. The believer in you learns direction. Together, they form something unshakable, peace that doesn't depend on outcomes. That's where purpose lives, not in the things you gain, but in the strength you build while waiting. So, if you're standing in that sacred space after loss, this is your sign. The story is not over. The author just turned the page. What God sends next will not be a replacement. It will be redemption. But you must be ready to see it, not with nostalgia, but with new eyes. Eyes that have learned to trust. Eyes that understand that every removal carried a message and every delay hid design. Challenge for the next 24 hours. Take 10 minutes of silence. No phone, no distractions. Ask yourself, what space did God create when He removed what He did? Then, write one line to remind yourself, I'm not losing, I'm being prepared. Keep that line where you can see it. Because preparation always precedes purpose. If this message spoke to you, subscribe and walk with us. Here we transform loss into purpose, waiting into wisdom, and silence into strength. You are not alone on this path. You are part of a community, learning to see divine purpose where others only see endings. Tell us in the comments, what do you believe God is preparing to send next in your life? Because remembering this is how peace begins, by trusting that every removal is followed by redemption.